Hey, Holly, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Lucy?
Good. Sometimes I wish that I hit record earlier on our conversations because we were talking about some really good shit before we hit
Maybe we
record.
should. Maybe we
So
should. Yeah.
maybe I'm just
It
going
could
to
be
start hitting
snippets of here and there of stuff that
I
you
know.
put out
I
there.
mean,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, there's always some good juicy stuff that comes out of it. But I'm looking forward to our conversation today
Yeah.
because it really, for me, it speaks to the true essence of what I did to pull myself out of that complete hot mess that I was in when I found myself in the sort of turmoil, the emotional upheaval of midlife,
Yeah.
and pull myself out to where I am now.
Yeah.
And for me, I call them my why-firmations, but it's typically what's been called a mantra. I always
Mantra.
say it wrong.
Yeah. Mantras,
Mantra.
affirmations. Yeah, exactly. I'm from New York, Long Island, so you don't want to take what I say as correct.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so maybe let's start off by, if you can share what you feel a mantra is.
Sure. I think a mantra or an affirmation is any statement, word that is going to create some kind of um, emotional reaction within ourselves, and a positive one at that. There are a ton of affirmations that are out there, well-known ones that we coin all the time, but I'm a fan, as you are, of having our own personal affirmations and mantras, and they change all the time depending on what we're going through. But they're just one of so many tools and strategies that we can use to lean into a more advantageous or optimistic and opportunistic mindset that we're in midlife. These are the little tools that support us along the way, but there are so many. But affirmations, mantras, I think, are huge, and you'll hear every expert out there touting the benefits, but they have to be very personal. They have to make sense to you. Otherwise, they're not going to be effective.
Yeah, and that's it exactly. And, just to give a little bit of context, what I did when it was actually on what I call my darkest day, I basically took pause and thought about who I actually wanted to be. I sort of tried to connect with that future version of myself.
Yeah.
And then I wrote down 5 simple statements about who that person was, how they thought, how they felt, how did they spend their time, make their money, that type of thing. And eventually over time, I did turn them into affirmations because I started, putting all of these pieces of the puzzle together. I started realizing, well, maybe I should be putting this in the form of an affirmation, but also in the present tense as if I already have it. And then eventually what I did is I tied it into my why.
Yeah. You impressed the hell out of me, Lucy, because all this stuff that you're referring to is really very science backed, like research backed. Like even you had told me about a book that you were reading recently.
Yeah, this one.
What's the name of it?
Oh, I got to uncover my face. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
And it's funny because that's been out there for that kind of conversation's been out there for a while. They call it the BPS, best possible self.
Oh, okay.
BPS. And there's been a ton of research actually that was done on those who create a BPS versus those who don't. In fact, one of my emails, weekly emails that I sent out there, shared an exercise on getting to know yourself, like almost writing, your best possible version of yourself. I pulled it out because you actually reminded me about this, and it's a great exercise where you carve out time for yourself, as I'm sure you did, and you're really basically selecting a time in your future, whether it be 5 months from now, 5 years from now. I wouldn't suggest any more than 5 years from now because so much changes.
Yeah, a lot changes.
Yeah. But it's a personal thing. If you want to do 5 years, you want to do a year from now, and you actually start to reflect on your personal life, on your professional life, Or maybe there might be, if you're not working anymore or recently retired or just don't have a job and not working, it might be what you're doing with yourself as far as spending your time, whether it be through volunteer work, activities, hobbies, et cetera, et cetera. And then your own social life. And that's your intimate and your peer relationships. And you really kind of go through this whole practice of really, almost, coming up with that BPS. What would you like to see happen in that period of time? And something to reflect back on.
Yeah. And I think what that does is having that vision of who your future self is. It stops you from reacting to life.
Yeah.
And proactively living it. And I can tell there is a distinct difference between how I used to live my life and how I live my life now. Yeah. And as I mentioned before, I don't verbally repeat my why-firmations every day. I write them out as part of my journaling practice. So what that's doing is every day it's reminding me of what's important. And I know it's a little bit like the chicken and the egg syndrome, but when you know who you want to be, you just kind of start acting like who you're going to be.
No, and I think we talked about this before. I mean, this is a large part of mindset, neuroplasticity. So, and I think I don't know if we really did a deep dive on it, but, neuroplasticity is basically the idea that we can reshape and retrain our brains. Because at one time, many, many years ago, it was believed that the brain was set after a certain period of time. And it actually turns out not to be the case at all. So we can reshape and retrain our brains. So did I ever share this analogy with you when we're on a ski slope? Did I ever share
I don't think so, no.
So think of it this way. So think of yourself as being like a skier. You're on a ski slope. I'm not a skier, but think of that, right? And all your life, you're going down this slope, like that inner critic, all that self-blame, that place that we go to automatically when we're triggered. So after years and years and years of it, it gets quite entrenched, right? Those tracks. So sometimes when something happens, your skis just take off in that direction because it's embedded, it's there. So what we want to do is now start shifting out of the left, right, creating new tracks. And by doing exercises like the why statements, the journaling, the affirmations, this is all practicing entrenching those new tracks in a new direction. So we're retraining our brains to now default to another way of thinking. So that's really what you're doing. And by doing it every day consistently, that's making them deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's how we can start to retrain and reshape our minds to think more opportunistically and optimistically, opposed to, negatively or pessimistically.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah, it does.
Every time he's doing, I'm like, nope, I gotta go right. I gotta go right. I gotta go right. I'm not going left. I'm gonna go right.
And it's taken time. I've been doing this for, over 5 years now.
And it's like this is one, affirmations and mantras is one of many tools that we can use to help us start creating those new neural pathways. And it does take time. It took a long time to form those other ones. So imagine to retrain our brains, we have to be patient with ourselves. But having that physically written down, there's something very powerful about pen to paper, right?
Yes. And not typing on a computer.
Right. And the repetitive nature of it, reminding yourself. And then it also just, it's not every day you're feeling it, of course, but you're kind of creating this level of accountability. How can I align with this in some shape or form today, even if I'm not really feeling all of myself today, but how can I at least honor it in one small way? That's what we're really looking at. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just, we want to align with this better version of ourselves, this BPS.
And I mean, let's be honest, when you're dealing, one of the things we talked about before we hit record, when you're dealing with some of the symptoms, we'll call them, of midlife, some days are just really, really hard. Like, I was sharing with you earlier that, our spring summer has just been very slow to get off the ground. And, in Canada here, we do have that, darkness of winter. And even though now, we're theoretically supposed to have more daylight, we seem to be caught under this constant cloud of, gray, drizzly weather, which has been fantastic because there's also been a lot of wildfires where I live.
Yeah.
So it's helping in that arena, but it's not doing anything for how I'm feeling. And, my husband keeps looking at me. He's like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
It's like, meh.
The environmental influencer is a real thing. In fact, it's one of the 6 influencers that I dive in when we talk about creating that empowered energetic state.
And it does. Like,
yeah.
if
And
you're,
it's funny because it's so overlooked. Of
yeah,
course, when I bring up the spiritual influencer, greater purpose and values, or emotional influencer, or mental influencer, social influencer, or physical influencer, people can see the impact of each of those. The environmental is the 6th influencer because it really does. And we're not just talking necessarily the weather. We're talking about the environment we surround ourselves in our homes, the cleanliness, broken equipment, organization, comfort of clothing, what we're wearing, like anything that affects the way we're showing up is going to, and weather is definitely one of them for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
And, there's some days when I'm writing out my why-firmations, I'm struggling.
Oh yeah.
But if there's just, like you said, there's just one little thing I can do to remind myself that I am aligning with my future self. Some days it's just, hey, you know what? I drank a lot of water today.
That's right.
Or I didn't have any wine today.
Don't you know what, Lucy, don't minimize that at all. That's exactly the point. And having those why-formations, sometimes it might be just that you reread the why-formation and that's as far as it went. And then you went back to bed. You know what I'm saying? There are going to be some days like, listen, like we even athletes have an off season, right? So we too are going to. And I think as midlife women, we really need to be sensitive to it because not only, hormonally is everything shifting and changing, which really affects everything, but everything in our life is starting to change pretty drastically as well. And it comes in different stages. And sometimes it feels like it's coming all at once. So it's a real double whammy, it really is in midlife. We were talking about, why do we kind of get stuck with the blah and kind of recreating those neural pathways? It really isn't entirely our fault, Lucy. We humans are rigged to the negativity bias, which I'm sure you've heard of the negativity bias, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about it before, maybe even. Every human in the world, we are, thanks to our ancestors, that was the way they survived. They had to know when, the saber-toothed tiger was going to come out and kill them, or the avalanche was about to come down on them. They had to think about what are the negative consequences of everything. And that's how they survived. But it's well within our DNA. It's not like 100% it's in our DNA. We all have the negativity bias. It's just knowing that we do and then learning to shift it. Where I think it's like really a double whammy for us midlifers, and we've talked about this as well before, is that we have grown up decades and decades with a be more, do more mentality coming from a well-intentioned 70s feminist movement of we can have it all. And it really didn't serve us well.
Well, the women saying that hadn't hit menopause yet.
Well, and also, that like I said to you, like what happened with that do-it-all mentality? We got burnt out. Like how long can you sustain that? You can't. So, we are done. We're like in midlife, we're like, and where did it even get us? It's not like we feel any better by checking all those boxes. So it didn't, because we really know that all the accolades in the world, happiness is an inside job. It doesn't matter, but we don't realize that until we're in midlife because, we were spoon fed. We do this, you do that, and then you will have this. It was a big fat lie. That isn't the case. No, that's not the case. So there's a lot more involved in that. So that's why I think it's particularly difficult for midlife women is not only are humans rigged to the negativity bias, but because we have been brought up to do more, be more mentality. And it's hard to all this, old habits die hard, so it's hard to just all of a sudden say, okay, so today I'm not going to be that. I'm going to be more present in my moment. I'm going to think more about myself. You can't just press a button and be there. It just doesn't happen.
No, and I mean, I've been working on this for just over 5 years. I just turned 50. Well, that means that I'm trying to reverse 45 years of programming.
That's right. That's right.
And it takes time. And that's why it's one of the things with my kids is I'm trying to help them unprogram themselves now, so that they don't sort of find themselves down this route.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you sort of look at everything that we're dealing with as women, as you said, we were brought up in this, do it all, have it all mentality.
Yeah.
So we are finding ourselves under an incredible amount of stress. And, I don't want to diminish what, women before us have gone through in society, but, a lot of people are speaking to the point right now that today's woman is facing, an unprecedented amount of stress, and we're carrying all of that, and we're living longer. We're expected to contribute in ways much longer, yet we don't have those resources to help us when it comes to even scratching the surface when it comes to our hormones. That support just simply isn't there. And, it still kind of baffles me that after all these years, it just seems to be a non-issue with our medical providers. That's what I don't understand is, is this coming as a big surprise to people? But I have heard doctors say that trying to unpack and understand women's hormones is so complicated and so time consuming that a lot of them just can't be bothered.
Well, the point is that there has to be research done. There just hasn't been enough. And, again, we're just scratching the surface with that. I think London is a little bit more ahead of us. The UK, there's a lot more movement going on there with that. But it's very slow moving here. You and I were exposed to people in the industry, so we're surrounded by it, a lot more. And that's one of the things I also suggest in creating, a better, like, affirmations, and mindset, is surrounding ourselves with images and people and knowledge who are aging powerfully, because there are people out there who are aging powerfully. Again, I'm going to make this very clear, not perfectly. We're not talking about perfection. We're just aging power. It's out. The research is out. We have so much more available to us, but we have to be our own advocates. But the only way to do that is to surround ourselves with the knowledge, the images, and people who are on this mission as well. That helps us train our brains to start seeing things, again, more opportunistically and optimistically in midlife. We could look at the midlife advantage or the midlife disadvantage, but you could say that about every decade. So the key is, me, I'm not a fan of toxic positivity. I am not. So the struggle is real, in midlife. I call it, the shit show. It's a shit show. But at the same time, there is a huge midlife advantage. And so if we can just turn our attention more to that, opposed to the disadvantage, not does it mean that we don't recognize it, but that we just try to start taking a look at the advantage. But we have to do this in a two-step process. We have to almost out our inner critic. But first we have to honor our inner critic. We have to know what's going on. What is my inner critic saying to me? What's going on? I have to be honest with myself, so that I can then out my inner critic and understand the distorted thoughts that are really, are occurring in my mind. And that's where really getting on an understanding of distortions of thoughts comes into play. And that's another whole probably opportunity for us to go into something else. But yeah, there's a man called Dr. Burns. He's wrote a big famous book. I forgot what the book was, but he came out with 10 thought distortions. Let me see if I can pull up his information. I pulled out some stuff to help us out a little bit. His name is, I think it's just, where is he? Dr. Burns. If I can find the name of the book, I would. It's been around for a long time. And it's where you can really understand the 10 thought distortions that we commonly default to. And so I actually did a workshop on flipping the script, helping women, kind of rein in the inner critic. And for pre-assignment, part of it was actually sitting down and putting the magnifying glass on your inner critic. And people are like, what do you mean? I want to squash that. And I'm like, oh, no, we need to unveil it. We need to out the inner critic. We need to understand what that voice is saying to you and understand where the distortion is occurring so that we can then challenge it.
Well, your inner critic, is it not speaking to you in a certain way because it wants to protect you? So it's looking at, well, what is it trying to protect you from? And is that something real that you actually need protecting from?
Exactly. And that's why just having these 10 thought distortions to look through, you can say, oh, I think I'm doing more that than this, and call it out for what it really is, opposed to the truth. As opposed to being the truth, is that really the case? Is your whole day a shit show? Is it the whole day is a shit show? And some days you might.
Some days it is.
It was. But, and that's where just having that reference of knowing, like, because we will just have immediate thoughts to what we're used to being programmed in. So if we can just understand our thoughts better, then we can challenge them more effectively.
Yeah, because we're going to, unless you choose otherwise, you're going to think the same thoughts that you've always thought.
Yeah.
Unless you put in a new thought and start thinking that thought.
Yeah.
But because you've thought the other thoughts for so long, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And that's where the mantras come into play, is that when you find yourself saying those negative things and repeating those old ways, if you can interrupt that thought with your mantra or whatever it is.
Exactly.
That's when you change it.
On. And I call it, creating or finding the loveliness. And you know what it is it's called the reticular activating system, the RAS. Yeah. So it's a brain filter that's responsible for what we filter in and what we filter out. So it's kind of like, when you're shopping, like for a new car, or your son or daughter is looking to get into this university or that university.
And all of a sudden, that's all you see.
Right? It's everywhere. Yeah. It's everywhere. So we want to filter in more loveliness, train the brain to start seeing, start moving in the direction of, the sun on my face, opposed to the wind in my face, if figuratively and figuratively, but again, it's not easy. The human being is conditioned to the negativity bias. So it's not easy by any means. And that's why, all these tricks of the trades, as we began with just affirmations and mantras, there's just so many that we can lean into to help support us and empower us, through every stage of our life, particularly midlife.
Yeah. And you know what, for anybody that thinks that it's a load of woohoo, it doesn't work, honest to God, if you want to know what a mess I was in, go back and look at, find my podcast episode called My Midlife Meltdown, because that's where I really get into the depth of where I was. And honestly, I'm not sure how or who helped me pull myself out of that hole, because it was the hole that almost ended my life, basically. And if that's the one thing that is why I'm sitting here today, add on everything that I've accomplished since then, well, what do you got to lose? Give it a try.
I mean, look where, and look where you are. And and that's why I say all the time when we speak, you really impress me, because, you're saying, like, listen, I'm not saying that your husband wasn't supportive and you didn't have friends who were supportive, but Lucy, the bottom line is you pulled yourself out of it. Yeah. You wanted more for yourself.
I had to choose.
Yeah. You said, this is it. It's my life. And and I say this, we joke, we've said this before, you don't want to mess with a menopausal woman, peri or post, who wants more for themselves, because they're done. They're ready to throw the gauntlet down, and they're ready to do business. again, it's not easy, but there's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of power in that. And it's really you. You are the one who created the change. You knew maybe to lean into your husband or to a friend or go to the doctor and check out hormonal replacement therapy, whatever it might have been, all these things together, it was you. It was you, always you. And that's, again, you deserve the credit.
But that speaks to the power and the choice that we all have.
Yeah.
Is ultimately you can't wait for somebody to come and give you the solution.
Oh, that's not happening.
As nice as that would be, it doesn't happen that way. Only you know yourself as well as you could know anybody, and only you can decide what's best for you.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to go looking for the answers. And ultimately you have to decide if the answers you're looking at resonate with you or don't, because, you know, what worked for one person isn't going to work for everybody. And if you've looked at anything when it comes to how our hormones are different and how they're fluctuating, there are no two women the same.
No, menopause is a very different journey for every woman.
It is. And that's why you have to expose yourself to as much information, expose yourself to as many resources, and then pick and choose what you think is going to work for you, for who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And again, you know, because the self-doubt will filter in.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you know, that's why we need to be amongst others who we can bounce things off of. I mean, that's why I do what I do for a living, because, you know, that's, you know, we need, you know, an objective, you know, sounding board, someone who understands you, but is not necessarily personally affected by you, because, you know, everyone's well-intentioned, but our moms or our dads or our husbands or our children, they do have an agenda. You know,
they get their own bias. Absolutely.
Yeah, there is a bias.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but we need to surround ourselves with all of this and be our advocates and, you know, and speak up because it's real. It's really the struggle is very, very real. Yeah.
Yeah. And going it alone is just not the way to do it. It just isn't.
And mindset is a huge piece of the equation. Yes, there are other pieces of the equation, as we've talked about, but cultivating a mindset that supports you is hugely instrumental. But it's very challenging because we have to rid ourselves of old patterns that might have served us or we believe served us at one time. And like I said before, old habits die very hard. So, you know, we have to really be patient with ourselves and, you know, say, okay, so I'm not giving up here. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you know, so maybe it was not ideal a day today, but what is in one small way that I can align with this best possible self, you know, this BPS of myself today. And that might be just picking up the phone and connecting with someone who makes you laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be these grandiose gestures.
No, it doesn't have to be getting on the bike and spinning and eating a salad and, you know, and cranking out that next content that you have for your clients. It could be as simple as, you know, I'm just connected with someone who lifts my spirits. Or, you know, better yet, I got 2 great dogs. I'm a big dog fan. I'm going to go hang with my dogs and go for a walk because
there you go.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Holly, now you have some gifts that people can get from you to better find out who you are and how you can help them.
Yeah, for sure.
Where can they find those gifts?
You can find me. I guess my best bet is on my website because everything is available there. But if you go on my Instagram, I also have a bio link that shares all my freebies. You know, and there's a couple of them. I mean, getting on my email list is probably the best way. Every week, I generally share something. This week, I happen to be highlighting who am I now? And leaning into our, you know, our strengths, our gifts, and our power in midlife. But it's hard to figure that out. So I share an exercise that's similar to your why statements. That's why it's crazy how we're so in sync with each other. And then I also have a quiz leaning into our midlife advantage. So you can find out more about where, you know, shining the light on your own personality strengths and your superpower in midlife. And then I also have a 10-question toolkit to reignite a midlife reboot. So if you're into journaling or, more writing out your thoughts, that might be a way to go too. But yeah, you can go either way. My website or my Instagram is another way to reach me.
Perfect. Make sure you check out the show notes. I'm going to have links in there. And if you're looking at finding out more on my why-firmations, I do have a 3-part audio course called 3 Steps to go from hot mess to badass and start rocking midlife. And that's where I begin to share a bit more about the process that I used when I first started writing out my why-firmations. It's an audio program. It's completely free, so you can listen to it while you're, taking a nice walk with your dogs or whatever, go ahead.
I will. Yes.
And we are going to be back here at noon Eastern Standard Time next Tuesday with another fantastic conversation. So until then, have a fantastic